Imagine a landscape where the dead outnumber the living and the structures of a forgotten world still stand defiantly against the sky. In the windswept limestone hills of northwestern Syria, time has grown heavy with silence. There are no monuments to violent conquest here, no charred layers of destruction in the soil. Yet more than 700 ancient settlements lie empty, their stone walls bleaching under a patient sun. These are the dead cities of Syria, a civilization that didn't burn, but simply stopped. To walk among them is to step into a moment frozen between two heartbeats, an abandoned theater of rural opulence. You stand before a two-story villa with arched windows and a wine press carved into bedrock, and the silence presses in from every direction. The doorways open onto empty rooms, and the wind moves through colonnades that have not heard a human voice in over 1,000 years. Historians call this region the ancient villages of northern Syria. But that clinical label offers no shelter from the central horror. A thriving, sophisticated society simply dissolved, leaving its earthly possessions intact behind it. What could possibly cause an entire civilization to vanish when not a single sword blade has left its mark? The question haunts the landscape as deeply as the fog that rolls through the dry valleys each winter morning. From a distance, the ruins look like the unburied bones of an old world, scattered across a plateau between Aleppo and Idlib. We tell ourselves that time reveals all things, but these stones guard their silence with a terrible patience. Let us step into the shadow of that ancient exile and listen for the whispers of society that chose the void over war. The first traces of a presence here reach back to the 4th century after Christ, when the Pax Romana still held the Mediterranean in a fragile embrace. The land was harsh but generous, a shallow, rocky soil that could somehow nourish vast groves of olive trees, stretching as far as the eye could see. Villages swelled into towns, and towns blossomed into small cities, all without the protective curtain of fortification walls. There was no need for ramparts because the prosperity was built on something far stronger than cavalry: liquid gold. This remote interior became the engine of an olive oil empire, with presses capable of crushing entire harvests and filling amphorae bound for Antioch and Constantinople. The scale of production was astonishing. Entire basements in the best preserved homes are still dominated by stone crushers and settling vats. And where the olive trees thinned, the vine took over, slaking the thirst of distant imperial capitals and wealthy merchant fleets. With trade came architectural ambition, and suddenly the limestone hills blazed with carved porticos, bathhouses, and soaring basilicas. The 6th century marked the zenith, a time when a village farmer could live in a house a Roman senator might envy. The evidence is written in every pediment and column capital. A rural middle class of astonishing size had been born from the thirsty soil. Yet for all this apparent timeless prosperity, a shadow was already stretching over the empire's eastern provinces. Even as the churches were being decorated with fresh mosaics, the first hairline fractures appeared in the old world order. Where archaeology falters, the theories begin to gather like vultures above the limestone. Some researchers point to the Justinianic plague that swept through the Byzantine world in the mid-6th century, scything down populations like dry wheat. The communal burial chambers cut into the rock outside several settlements certainly hold the bones of a generation that knew terror. But plague rarely erases a society so completely that no one returns to reclaim the abandoned presses. Another hypothesis digs deeper into the soil, suggesting that the very prosperity of the land became its own executioner. Centuries of intensive monoculture on fragile karst terrain may have led to catastrophic erosion and soil exhaustion. When the olive trees began to die, the economy suffocated along with them, and the people drained away toward greener lowlands. Yet the stones remain mute on the subject, offering no single keystone of a collapsing ecology. The labyrinth of explanations grows darker when you shift your gaze from the land to the horizon line. By the 7th century, the old trade routes that poured wealth into these hills were being violently reconfigured. The rise of Islam and the Arab conquests did not destroy these settlements. Most show no signs of siege or slaughter. But the new geopolitical map of the region turned this once central trade corridor into a forgotten backwater, bypassed by the arteries of a new world. The markets that had once hungered for Syrian oil and wine simply ceased to exist, and the lifeblood of the cities coagulated in silence. Imagine a factory town after the factory leaves, but left perfectly preserved with every tool still resting on the bench. A smaller school of thought whispers of climate shift, a subtle cooling and drying that pinched agricultural yields beyond the point of survival. None of these theories alone can account for the ghostly totality of the abandonment. The truth, if it exists at all, is likely a slow poison woven from many threads, economic, biological, and environmental, tightening together over decades. The people did not flee in a single terrified exodus. They may have simply faded, one family at a time, until the last voice echoed in an empty church. Behind every archaeological riddle, there are human minds stretched to the breaking point by the search for certainty. The Bedouin nomads who wandered these hills for centuries spun their own dark lore about the silent cities, calling them the dwellings of vanished giants or places cursed by envy. When Western explorers first stumbled upon the ruins in the 19th century, they could barely trust their own sketches. Here were entire towns, more intact than anything in Italy or Greece, sitting in a landscape that generations of scholars had dismissed as a provincial backwater. The Viscount de Vogüé and his team walked through houses where wooden beams still held mezzanine floors, and they felt the weight of an unanswerable riddle. Their journals record a profound unease, an intellectual vertigo born from confronting a civilization that had somehow bypassed the normal rituals of collapse. There were no victors to write the history, no defeated to bury the dead, only the slow creep of lichen and limestone dust. The obsessive search for an explanation has drawn archaeologists into a maze where each new answer splits into 3 more questions. Some have spent entire careers measuring the wear patterns on olive press weights, desperate to hear the economic heartbeat of a society long dead. The psychological toll of this silent place is a character in its own right, a low hum of existential dread that vibrates beneath every toppled pediment. To stand in the vast monastic complex of St. Simeon stylites nearby is to feel the fervor that once gripped this region, a spiritual intensity that now seems to mock its own absurd conclusion. The great pillar, where a holy man lived for 37 years, still points heavenward, but the audience has long since dissolved. The human obsession with these carcasses of stone reflects a deeper terror, that our own complex world might, in the end, leave no more trace than a whisper of wind through a dry cistern. We want to believe that a civilization must end with fire and blood because a quiet departure suggests something far more unsettling about the nature of time. If prosperity can simply evaporate like morning dew, what inheritance are we truly building with our own steel and glass? The dead cities force that question upon every visitor, wrapping it in the scent of wild thyme and sun-warmed limestone. Night falls over the Jebel Allah region, and the shadows stretch from the ancient ruins like spilled ink absorbing the last light. There is a comfort in believing that history is a solved puzzle, that we have mapped the rise and fall of empires as neatly as a clock. But here, the clockwork has been smashed, and the gears lie rusting in the sand. Hundreds of abandoned settlements still wait, their cisterns cracked, their presses silent, their frescoes fading under the indifferent stars. The enduring enigma is not who lived here, or even precisely when they left. It is the manner of their exit from the stage of history. A civilization that vanished without war is a challenge to the very grammar of catastrophe. The ruins sit on the borderline between the ancient and the modern world, as if they belong to neither, suspended in a bubble of arrested decay. The longer you gaze at the dark doorways, the more you begin to suspect that the cities never truly died at all. They simply moved one layer deeper into the mystery. There is a theory, whispered more in philosophy than in hard science, that societies can reach a point of spiritual exhaustion, a collective decision to relinquish the burden of continuity. And as you look upon these hills at dusk, with the fog threading through the olive groves like the breath of a ghost, that theory holds a chilling weight. We are left with the artifacts and the architecture, a library written in stone that no one can fully translate. The language of beasts and leaves might hold the final chapter, the story of a landscape that demanded too much and gave too little back in return. The stars wheel above the dead cities, the same constellations that presided over the last family, sealing their gate for the final time. Time has not healed the wound, but has embalmed it perfectly, gifting us a monument to the fragility of human achievement. The true mystery endures not beneath the ground, but in the silence that hangs between the standing walls. 1,000 years from now, when another wind sifts through our own abandoned towers, will the explanation be any more obvious? The dead cities remain what they have always been. A mirror held up to the impermanence of every civilization that ever dared to build upon the patience of the earth. Perhaps the greatest act of violence the dead can commit against the living is the refusal to explain their own absence. So we walk among them, lanterns in hand, tracing the grooves of the last olive press, and find only the eternal fade. The stone, at least, will have the final word, long after the questions have turned to dust.